The Quest of Prince Dharmavira, Prologue, The Dream of the Golden Lotus. In the vast and prosperous kingdom of Aswaloka, there stood a grand palace, glittering in the light of dawn, nestled at the foot of the Veil of the Eternal, a majestic range of mountains that guarded the land. This palace, known as the Golden Palace, was home to King Samantavira, a just and benevolent ruler. His only son, Prince Dharmavira, was loved by all for his kindness, wisdom, and compassion, and it was foretold that he would inherit the throne and rule with even greater justice than his father. Yet, despite the opulence surrounding him, Prince Dharmavira's heart was troubled. He was a young man of keen intellect, and his mind often wandered to deeper questions about life, death, and the meaning of existence. These questions gnawed at his soul, even in moments of joy, and he found no solace in the pleasures of the palace or the comforts of royal life. One night, Dharmavira had a dream so vivid that it woke him from his sleep. In the dream, he stood in a vast desert, the sun scorching the ground, its heat oppressive and unrelenting. There was no sign of life anywhere, just barren land, cracked earth, and endless horizons of desolation. But in the middle of this desert, there bloomed a single, resplendent golden lotus. Its petals were radiant, glowing with a light that seemed to come from within. As Dharmavira approached the lotus, each petal began to reveal a scene. On one petal, he saw an old man hunched over, his body frail and weak, struggling to take each step. On another, he saw a sick man writhing in agony, his face twisted in pain. On a third petal, he saw a lifeless body, cold and still, surrounded by mourners weeping in sorrow. Finally, on the fourth petal, he saw a wandering monk, serene and peaceful, with nothing but a robe and a begging bowl, walking with an air of contentment despite his meager possessions. As he gazed at these images, Dharmavira's heart was filled with a sense of unease and sorrow. What did it all mean? Why was there so much suffering in the world? And what was the purpose of life if it was destined to end in death? He reached out to touch the lotus, hoping to find answers, but as soon as his fingers brushed against it, the lotus dissolved into a cloud of dust, swept away by the wind. Dharmavira awoke in a cold sweat, his heart pounding. He sat up in bed, trying to calm himself, but the images from the dream lingered in his mind. The old man, the sick man, the corpse, and the monk, all of them felt so real, as if they were not just part of his dream, but reflections of some deeper truth he had yet to understand. From that night on, Dharmavira could not shake the feeling that his life in the palace, with all its luxuries and pleasures, was somehow hollow. He felt a growing sense of detachment from the world around him, as if the opulence of the royal court was nothing more than an illusion, masking the true nature of existence. He began to spend more and more time alone, meditating on the questions that plagued his heart. Chapter 1: The Prince's Restlessness. Prince Dharmavira stood on the balcony of the Golden Palace, gazing out over the kingdom of Aswaloka. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the rolling hills, lush forests, and winding rivers that made up his father's domain. From this vantage point, the world looked peaceful and serene. Farmers were returning from the fields, children played in the streets, and the distant sound of bells from the temple carried on the evening breeze. And yet, as he looked out over this seemingly perfect world, Dharmavira's heart felt heavy. The dream he had had so many months ago still haunted him, and the questions it had stirred in his soul remained unanswered. What is the meaning of all this? He whispered to himself. Why do we live only to suffer and die? His mind was filled with memories of the old man, the sick man, and the corpse from his dream. He had seen these things in the world as well. Just a week ago, he had visited a village on the outskirts of the kingdom where a deadly illness had spread. The villagers were gaunt and pale, their bodies ravaged by disease, and the sight of their suffering had shaken him to his core. It seemed no matter how prosperous the kingdom was, suffering was always present, lurking in the shadows. Dharmavira turned away from the view and made his way through the palace corridors. His footsteps echoed in the grand halls, and as he walked, he passed by scenes of luxury and wealth. Courtiers in fine silks discussing matters of the state, servants carrying trays of exotic fruits and delicacies, and musicians playing soothing melodies. But none of it brought him peace. The more he saw, the more he felt that all of this life of wealth and privilege, was an illusion, a veil that concealed the truth of suffering. He made his way to the royal gardens, seeking solitude among the trees and flowers. There, he found his mother, Queen Suvarna, sitting by a lotus pond, her hands gently tending to the flowers. She looked up as Dharmavira approached and smiled warmly. "My son," she said, "you look troubled. Come, sit with me." Dharmavira sat beside his mother, but he remained silent for a moment, unsure of how to express the turmoil in his heart. Finally, he spoke. "Mother, do you ever wonder about the meaning of life?" he asked. "Why do we live, only to grow old, fall ill, and die? What is the purpose of all this?" Queen Suvarna looked at her son with a mixture of sadness and understanding. She had seen the changes in him over the past months, the growing restlessness, the sense of detachment. She had always known that Dharmavira was different from other young men, more thoughtful and introspective. But now, it seemed as though something deeper was stirring within him. The king was silent for a long time, his gaze distant as he weighed his son's words. Finally, he nodded. "Very well, Dharmavira. If this is the path you must walk, I will not stand in your way, but promise me that you will return when you have found what you seek." "I promise, father," Dharmavira said, though in his heart he knew that his journey might take him far beyond the palace walls, perhaps even beyond the kingdom itself. That night, as the palace slept, Dharmavira quietly gathered his belongings, simple robes, a water flask, and a small bundle of food. He left a note for his mother and father, explaining his decision, and then he slipped out of the palace, disappearing into the night. For days, Dharmavira wandered the countryside, observing the world beyond the palace walls. He saw the simplicity of village life, the hardships faced by farmers and laborers, and the joy and sorrow that intermingled in the lives of ordinary people. Yet as much as he saw, he still did not find the answers he sought. One day, as he traveled along a dusty road, Dharmavira encountered an old man sitting by the roadside, his back bent with age and his hands trembling. The man's skin was wrinkled, and his eyes were clouded with the passage of time. Dharmavira stopped and knelt beside him. "Are you all right, sir?" he asked gently. The old man looked up at him with a faint smile. "Ah, young man, I am as well as one can be at my age, but my body is not what it once was. These old bones creak and my joints ache. Each day is a struggle." Dharmavira felt a pang of sorrow in his heart. Here was the first of the 4 encounters from his dream, the reality of old age, inevitable and inescapable. He helped the man to his feet and offered him some water from his flask. "Thank you, young prince," the old man said, recognizing Dharmavira's noble bearing. But even water cannot restore the strength of youth. Dharmavira continued on his journey, his heart heavy with the realization that all beings must one day grow old. Not long after, he came upon a man lying by the roadside, his face flushed with fever, his body shaking with illness. The man groaned in pain, his eyes filled with anguish. Dharmavira knelt beside him, offering comfort. "What has happened to you?" "I am ill," the man replied weakly. "The fever has taken hold of me, and I fear I may not survive." Dharmavira watched helplessly as the man writhed in pain, his body overcome with sickness. Here was the second of the 4 encounters, the suffering of illness. No matter how strong or healthy one might be, sickness could strike at any moment, bringing misery and despair. Dharmavira helped the man as best he could, giving him water and easing his suffering. But as he continued his journey, the weight of what he had seen pressed down on his heart. Days later, as he passed through a small village, Dharmavira came across a funeral procession. The mourners were carrying a body wrapped in white cloth, and their faces were etched with sorrow. The air was thick with grief, and the sound of weeping filled the air. Dharmavira stood by the side of the road, watching the procession pass. Here was the third of the 4 encounters, the reality of death. No one could escape it, not kings, not peasants, not even the strongest or wisest of men. Death came for all, and with it came the sorrow of those left behind. As Dharmavira continued his journey, the weight of these encounters pressed heavily on his heart. He had seen old age, sickness, and death, and each had left him with more questions than answers. Why did these things happen? Was there no escape from the cycle of suffering? It was then that Dharmavira encountered the 4th and final figure from his dream, a wandering monk, dressed in simple robes, carrying nothing but a begging bowl. The monk walked with a calm and peaceful demeanor, his face serene despite the harshness of the world around him. Dharmavira approached the monk, curious. "Who are you, and how is it that you seem so content in this world filled with suffering?" The monk smiled gently. "I am but a seeker, like yourself. I have renounced the trappings of this world and seek only to understand the true nature of existence. I have found peace in the practice of mindfulness and meditation, for it is through understanding the impermanence of all things that one can find liberation from suffering." Dharmavira listened intently, his heart stirred by the monk's words. Could it be that the answers he sought lay not in wealth or power, but in the renunciation of worldly attachments? Could it be that the path to understanding was one of simplicity and mindfulness? The monk continued on his way, and Dharmavira stood in silence, contemplating all that he had seen and heard. The encounters with old age, sickness, death, and the wandering monk had shown him the truth of suffering, but they had also hinted at a way to transcend it. With renewed resolve, Dharmavira knew that his journey was far from over. He would seek out a teacher, someone who could guide him on the path to enlightenment. He would renounce his former life and dedicate himself to understanding the true nature of existence. And so, with the image of the golden lotus from his dream still vivid in his mind, Dharmavira set out to find the truth. Chapter 3. The Trials of the Forest. Dharmavira's journey led him deep into the heart of the forest, far from the villages and towns where he had previously wandered. The trees towered above him, their branches forming a thick canopy that blocked out the sun, casting the forest floor in a cool, green twilight. The air was thick with the scent of earth and leaves, and the sounds of birds and insects filled the air. For weeks, Dharmavira traveled through the forest, seeking out wise teachers and sages who could guide him on his path. He met many along the way, hermits who lived in caves, monks who meditated by rivers, and ascetics who practiced severe austerities in the hope of attaining enlightenment. Each of them had their own teachings, their own methods for understanding the nature of existence. Some taught him the importance of renunciation, urging him to give up all attachments to the material world. Others emphasized the power of meditation, teaching him to still his mind and observe his thoughts without judgment. Dharmavira practiced diligently, but no matter how hard he tried, he could not quiet the turmoil within his heart. The questions that had haunted him from the beginning still remained unanswered. Why did suffering exist, and how could one escape the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth? One day, as he was meditating by a river, Dharmavira encountered a group of ascetics who practiced extreme austerities. Their bodies were emaciated from years of fasting, their skin stretched tightly over their bones. They lived in caves, subsisting on little more than roots and water, and spent their days in silence and meditation. The leader of the group, a man named Vibhishana, approached Dharmavira as he sat by the river. "You are a seeker of truth, are you not?" Vibhishana asked. Dharmavira nodded. "I am. I have traveled far and wide in search of understanding, but I have not yet found the answers I seek." "Then you must join us," Vibhishana said. "We practice the path of renunciation, for it is only by denying the body and its desires that one can attain enlightenment. We fast, we meditate, we subject ourselves to hardship, for it is through suffering that one is purified." Dharmavira considered the man's words. He had seen many ascetics on his journey, and he had been impressed by their discipline and dedication. Perhaps this was the path he had been seeking, the path of self-denial, of overcoming the body's desires in order to transcend the suffering of the world. "I will join you," Dharmavira said. And so for the next several years, Dharmavira lived among the ascetics, practicing their severe austerities. He fasted for days on end, consuming only water and a few grains of rice. He sat in meditation for hours at a time, his legs crossed, his mind focused on a single point. He subjected his body to the harshness of the forest, enduring the cold, the heat, and the biting insects. But despite his efforts, Dharmavira found no peace. His body grew weak and frail, his mind clouded by hunger and exhaustion. The questions that had driven him to seek the truth still lingered in his heart, unanswered and unresolved. One night, as he sat by the river, his body trembling with weakness, Dharmavira realized that he could not continue on this path. The austerities had brought him no closer to enlightenment. They had only brought him suffering. He had come to understand that denying the body's needs did not lead to liberation. It only led to more suffering. With great difficulty, Dharmavira rose to his feet and made his way back to the group of ascetics. Vibhishana saw him approaching and frowned. "You are leaving us," Vibhishana said, his voice cold. Dharmavira nodded. "Yes, this path is not the one I seek. I have come to realize that denying the body's needs only creates more suffering." Vibhishana's eyes narrowed. "You are weak. You lack the discipline and the will to attain enlightenment." Dharmavira met the man's gaze steadily. "Perhaps, but I know now that the middle way, the path between indulgence and austerity, is the path I must follow." Without another word, Dharmavira turned and left the ascetics behind, his heart lighter than it had been in years. He did not know where his journey would lead him next, but he was certain that he was finally on the right path, the path of balance, of moderation, and of mindfulness. As he walked through the forest, the image of the golden lotus from his dream returned to his mind. He understood now that the lotus represented the truth he had been seeking all along, the truth that lay beyond both pleasure and pain, beyond both indulgence and denial. Dharmavira knew that his journey was far from over, but for the first time in his life, he felt a sense of peace. He had found the path, and now all that remained was to walk it. Chapter 4. The Awakening Beneath the Bodhi Tree. After leaving the ascetics, Dharmavira wandered alone for many days, his mind clear and his heart filled with a quiet sense of purpose. He no longer sought answers from others, for he had come to realize that the truth he sought could only be found within himself. One day, as he traveled through the countryside, he came upon a small village at the edge of a forest. There, he met a kind woman named Sujata, who offered him food and shelter. Dharmavira accepted her kindness with gratitude, for his body was still weak from the years of austerities he had practiced. As they sat together beneath the shade of a large tree, Sujata offered him a bowl of rice milk. "You are a wanderer, are you not?" she asked. "What is it that you seek?" Dharmavira smiled gently. "I seek the truth. I seek to understand the nature of suffering and how one can be free from it." Sujata nodded thoughtfully. "I do not know much about such things, but I do know that one must be kind to oneself as well as to others. You cannot help others if you do not first take care of yourself." Her words resonated deeply with Dharmavira, and he realized that she was right. He had spent so many years denying himself, thinking that the path to enlightenment required him to reject the body and its needs. But now he saw that true understanding came from balance, from taking care of both the body and the mind, and from living a life of mindfulness and compassion. After thanking Sujata for her hospitality, Dharmavira set out once more, feeling stronger and more determined than ever. He made his way to a sacred grove at the edge of the village, where there stood a large and ancient Bodhi tree, its branches spreading wide and its roots deep in the earth. Dharmavira knew that this was the place where he would find the answers he sought. He sat down beneath the Bodhi tree, crossing his legs in meditation, and vowed not to rise until he had attained enlightenment. For days and nights, Dharmavira sat in deep meditation, his mind focused and still. He observed his thoughts as they rose and fell, like waves on the surface of a calm sea. He watched as memories, desires, and fears passed through his mind, but he did not cling to them or push them away. He simply observed with mindfulness and equanimity. As he meditated, Dharmavira began to see the truth of impermanence, the understanding that all things in the world are in a constant state of change. He saw that suffering arises when one clings to what is impermanent, trying to hold on to things that are bound to fade away. He realized that the root of suffering lay in attachment, in the desire for things to be other than they are. And then, on the morning of the seventh day, as the first light of dawn broke through the trees, Dharmavira's mind was filled with a profound and radiant clarity. He saw the true nature of existence, the interconnectedness of all life, the impermanence of all things, and the possibility of liberation from suffering. In that moment, Dharmavira attained enlightenment. He had found the truth he had been seeking all along, the middle way, the path of balance and mindfulness that led to the end of suffering. As he sat beneath the Bodhi tree, his heart filled with compassion for all beings, Dharmavira realized that his journey was not yet over. He had found the truth, but now he had to share it with others, to help them find the same peace and liberation that he had found. And so Dharmavira rose from his meditation, filled with a deep sense of purpose and clarity. He would return to the world, not as a prince or a ruler, but as a teacher, a guide for others who sought the path to enlightenment. Epilogue. The return to Aswaloka. Years passed, and the kingdom of Aswaloka flourished under the rule of King Samantavira. The people spoke often of the prince who had left the palace to seek the truth, and many wondered if he would ever return. One day, a figure appeared at the gates of the palace. He was dressed in simple robes, his face serene and peaceful, his eyes filled with a deep and quiet wisdom. The guards recognized him at once. It was Prince Dharmavira, returned at last. Word quickly spread throughout the palace, and soon King Samantavira and Queen Suvarna came to greet their son. They embraced him warmly, their hearts filled with joy at his return. "Dharmavira," the king said, "you have been gone for so long. Have you found the truth you sought?" Dharmavira smiled gently. "Yes, father, I have found the truth, and now I wish to share it with others." The king and queen listened as Dharmavira spoke of his journey, of the 4 encounters, of his years in the forest, and of the enlightenment he had attained beneath the Bodhi tree. He spoke of the middle way, of mindfulness and compassion, and of the path to liberation from suffering. The people of Aswaloka soon gathered to hear Dharmavira's teachings, and many were inspired by his words. They too sought to live lives of balance and mindfulness, to cultivate compassion and understanding, and to free themselves from the cycle of suffering. And so, Dharmavira's teachings spread throughout the kingdom and beyond, bringing peace and wisdom to all who heard them. Prince Dharmavira, once a restless young man seeking the truth, had become a great teacher, a beacon of light for those who sought the path to enlightenment. And in his heart, Dharmavira knew that the golden lotus from his dream had finally bloomed.